state is enhancing 2 state-owned historical sites to better complement the Natchez National Historic Park sites. So, of course, I'd want to invite you to visit those and asking for your willingness to commit to me working on these 2 particular projects in Vicksburg and Natchez.
Well, Senator, thank you. And first of all, I just want to thank you, too, for your capabilities. It's great to have a senator who grew up in agriculture and also was ag commissioner. That's fantastic. I spent most of my life, my family was all involved in agriculture my entire life, and many of my cousins still are. So it's such an important part of our national security as well. But in terms of the national park thing, as we said earlier, we've got a big deferred maintenance issue, and we have a big opportunity. These are the precious spots out of the billions of acres of surface, subsurface, and offshore that we own. The national park is for Americans is a priority, and we need to take care of these sites, whether historic or others. And again, we have to make sure that they're capable of handling and supporting the visitors that want to see them. We know they're great for the local economy. So appreciate the invitation and look forward to working with you.
Thank you on that. Now I'm going to go to South Mississippi, our offshore oil and gas production in the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, it plays a vital role in the Gulf states' economies as well. We call it our blue economy down there. The Anchor platform, it's recently come online with the Gulf of Mexico, but it will produce 75,000 barrels of oil per day. And this oil is refined in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And obviously the jobs that it provides there and the benefits that we have. But it is important that the department maintain a steady leasing schedule to ensure companies can continue the opportunities there for exploration, for new production to support the affordable, reliable energy. So the current National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Plan, or the 5-year plan, includes only 3 possible lease sales. A historic low. Do you believe the current 5-year plan is adequate to continue to meet the energy needs of the nation? And if not, will it be a priority of Interior to develop or finalize a new 5-year plan?
Well, Senator, I think that you know the long lead times it takes for the private sector to make the significant investments to do safe, secure, and smart, sophisticated offshore development. It's a really important part of our nation's economy and our national security. The fact that during the current administration, the lease sales have been so unpredictable and disruptive, and the fact that they're projecting forward to have among the fewest we've ever had, almost would guarantee that we would see a decline in energy production in offshore in the years ahead because of the lead times. And knowing that we're in a national security battle, and the way that we win, the way that we ensure America's future is that we've got energy dominance. This is opposed to the president's direction. I mean, the president would be saying we've got to be doing more smart development, not less. And as I stated earlier with one of the questions in North Dakota, we literally were suing the federal government because they were not holding the lawfully required lease sales. So getting lease sales to be regular, predictable, and at a level that allows us to maintain energy production in our country is a minimum standard for us.
Thank you for those answers, and I cannot tell you how glad we are to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me say I very much look forward to working with you and Senator Heinrich. We've always worked on these issues in a bipartisan way, and I look forward to doing it again. Mr. Burgum, I think you know from our visit in the office how strongly I feel about these clean energy tax credits. I wrote this package, $400 billion or so, the biggest investment in fighting climate change in American history. It uses carrots, not sticks. The more you reduce carbon, the bigger your tax savings. It's private sector driven. And in what I consider to be a huge breakthrough, we reward technological neutrality. The reason that's so important, as you and I talked about, is nobody knows what the big carbon reducers are going to be 30 years from now. And so the reason I insisted on that provision is it creates what I call an innovation lane. It's an opportunity to send a message to people about every possible type of energy use, that you're going to have a chance, if you innovate, to be part of a very bright future. Now, I heard something, and I'm just counting on you to deny it, that maybe you weren't as interested in this as I thought you were in the office. So you seem kind of skeptical in some of the earlier discussion, and I just hope, because you're going to be very influential in the whole administration on energy, that we can work together on this. I believe we'll work together on a variety of other issues as well. Your thoughts?
Well, Senator, I really enjoyed our discussion and the time and the extra time we spent together. And I, as I said then, would restate now that I think your principles are really sound about being, technology neutral, about having carrots versus sticks, and also about having, private sector versus just all government.
I ought to quit while I'm ahead.
Yeah, well, that was all good. I mean, it's all good stuff. I think if I don't know specifically other comments you made as it relates to the electrical grid, that have got now a significant imbalance in the amount of projects that are intermittent and not persistent, and we need to make sure for our country to be successful in the near term that we've got to get back to making sure that we've got the appropriate amount of base load to manage both of those things. Because if the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, and we don't have base load, then we got brownouts and blackouts. We got higher electric prices for every American. So it's the balance of trying to achieve that. And then the other point that I may have said today, which I would stand by, is that it's great that people thought, hey, let's put massive incentives around EVs, around electric vehicles, against fueled cars that have liquid fuels. But in America, if there's innovation neutrality, in North Dakota, we're producing carbon negative barrel of oil. We're producing carbon neutral biofuels. I mean, America built 200,000 gas stations without a dime of public money or taxpayer incentives, because the market created that. And we have got an opportunity to have innovation in an innovation lane around decarbonizing liquid fuels. But so we just have to make sure we have the balance, because we need it all. We need it all to win the competition we're going to win.
Well, first of all, on the electric front, I'm very much of your view there. I mean, we have had big challenges in our part of the world. There's a transmission issue. The two pieces that are really left out is how to deal with electric and how to promote transmission. I'm very interested in working with you. I'm going to take, as I run back to the Finance Committee where we're talking about these issues, the view that you're open to continue working in this space rather than coming on in and just saying we're going to chuck it in the trash can, because I'm always interested in improving on something. I mean, the Founding Fathers said that a new Congress is never bound by absolutely everything from a past Congress. So I'm interested in improving it. But I'm going to take out of our discussion that you're open to working with me and others in a bipartisan way. At one point, this was a purely bipartisan kind of effort. We can talk about what happened, because I thought it was a question of who was going to get the credit. But I'm going to take out of here that you'll work with me.
Yeah, you can count on that I will. And you can also count on that I'm going to be anchored in two things. One is national security, so we shouldn't have incentives that enslave us to getting all of our critical minerals from a major power competitor like China. And then the other thing is you can count on is that I'm going to be focused on the economy and affordability, because if we can do something for $60 a ton versus $900 a ton, I'm going to choose the $60 a ton of avoided CO2.
My time is out, but I'm going to say the idea of linking a lower carbon future with lower prices and the focus on national security is a kind of triangle with three sides that I can support, and I'd like to work with you on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Brasso.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Governor, congratulations. Great to be with you again. Thanks for our time together. As you know, the federal government controls hundreds of millions of acres of land in the West. You'd like to look at this committee in our home states. And the well-being, certainly in my home state of Wyoming, depends on strong leadership at the Department of Interior. The department must work with states and local communities to manage our resources in a way that works for the people that actually live on the land. And over the last 4 years, that has been a big problem, as we've seen an administration that seemed to just be punishing the West. The will of the people who depend on the land, live on the land, take care of the land was ignored the last 4 years. So, Governor, there's a long list of things that I believe must be fixed, and I'm going to ask for your help. Number one, the Rock Springs, Wyoming, the RMP, that stands for the Resource Management Plan, as you and I know, and those who are watching will know about now, 2024. They did it not even a week after the governor of Wyoming submitted his appeal to the proposed plan, but they rushed out the door with this. This final plan is going to devastate the people of southwest Wyoming. It's going to lock up millions of acres of land that local communities in the entire state relies upon. The governor, our state legislature, the county commissioners, the local communities, all strongly oppose what the federal government is slamming down our throats. So will you commit to work with my office and the state to undo this disastrous plan?
Senator, I'm familiar, having been governor till December 15th, because we had a similar experience in North Dakota of having plans like this pushed on the state of North Dakota. So, yeah, absolutely, you can count on me working with you.
Great. In Wyoming, about 2/3 of our minerals under the land are owned by the federal government, about half the surface land and 2/3 of the minerals under the land. That means that energy development in my state depends on cooperation from the Department of Interior. Wyoming's legislative leaders would benefit from meeting with you directly as they plan the state's energy future, and I'd like to ask you to commit to joining our Wyoming delegation as well as the Wyoming stakeholders to talk about the future.
I would enjoy that very much, and I've enjoyed the relationship I had with Governor Matt Mead and now Governor Mark Gordon, that we've been on regular communication because there's been a lot of shared challenges between Wyoming and North Dakota.
And both of those current governor and former governor speak with you with great appreciation, great admiration, and great respect. So look forward to that. Buffalo, Wyoming. Last year, the outgoing administration finalized a resource management plan for Buffalo, the Buffalo, Wyoming field office. This plan would ban new coal leasing in the Powder River Basin, which is the most energy-rich area in the country. We are America's energy breadbasket in Wyoming. This short-sighted decision is an insult to our communities and harmful for American energy security. If confirmed, would you work with me to reverse this plan?
Absolutely, and I also know that and when we talk about critical minerals, that in that Powder River coal include many of the critical minerals that we need for defense, for technology, and for the future of this country. And so, rather than this blanket approach of trying to block that type of energy development, we need to be thinking about how innovation can help us solve multiple problems at once.
I want to move now to oil and gas leases. The outgoing administration has a disgraceful record on oil and gas management. It blocked and looked at and locked and blocked our production just about every turn. It hasn't issued leases for a lease sale held over 4 years ago, and they still haven't issued the leases. And it deferred over 600,000 acres from leasing in Wyoming that were previously cleared for oil and gas production. If confirmed, will you work to quickly issue those leases and offer additional acres for leasing?
Absolutely, and Senator, as I've stated before, North Dakota's faced the same, what I view as absolutely, there's a case in federal court, which I'm positive the ruling is going to be that the current administration, the Biden administration, did not follow the law relative to holding required lease sales.
The next area is sage grouse. Wyoming is the home to a large population of greater sage grouse and its habitat. For over 15 years, Wyoming has been at the forefront of adopting new management approaches to protect the species. Our state has led successful efforts to balance conservation with economic development. Again, the Biden administration proposed to designate over 600,000 acres in Wyoming as, quote, areas of critical environmental concern. That's going to lock up thousands of acres in Wyoming, halting production and development across the state. Would you be willing to reopen the department's greater sage grouse management?
I've been advised that the rule of decision came out this morning. I don't want to put myself into making a forward statement that would recuse, that I would have to recuse. But I would just say, from my time as chairman of Western Governors, I'm familiar with the use of designations to try to restrict energy development, even when you might have a species like the sage grouse that's neither on the endangered or the threatened list.
I'll ask one final question, and you've done quite a bit on the grizzly bear already, so let me talk about federal grazing. The Department of Interior is critical in its role for managing federal lands across the West. Almost half of the land in Wyoming, owned by the federal government, land managed under multiple use is required by law to be managed without impairment of the productivity of the land. These are public places that people from Wyoming depend on accessing for their livelihoods. And timber harvesting, recreation, energy, and mineral production to take place on federal lands. Will you support the multiple use mandate, the law mandates for federal land?
Absolutely, I do, Senator. And since we've talked about wildfires today, grazing reduces fuel load, timber management appropriately reduces fuel load, surface development can create roads paid for by the private sector that support our firefighters. All of the multiple use is a part of a component of a comprehensive rethinking of how we think about fire management on federal lands.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cotton.
Governor, welcome and congratulations. We've reached the regrettable point that we often do in the Senate where almost everything has been said. I will refrain from saying a lot of what's gone before me, but I will say for the record that I want to associate myself with the comments of my Republican colleagues about the need for significantly increasing energy production while also being responsible stewards of our public lands and waters. There is, however, one issue I don't think has been discussed yet under the Endangered Species Act. And I think it's a scandal of the first order. I'm surprised it hasn't gotten more attention as of late. On January 3rd, the New York Times published a story about the so-called snail darter. It was a species that was designated as endangered by Fish and Wildlife back in the 1970s. The entire thrust of the story is that a zoologist basically made up this species of snail darter, all for the point of halting construction of the Tellico Dam on the Little Tennessee River. After many years of delay, it finally took an act of Congress to build that dam. A academic side in that article said that this is a not uncommon practice creating new species when there's really no difference between other extant non-endangered species for what he called the downstream conservation implications, which is to say activists creating species, calling them endangered, to stop the construction of a dam or a power generation plant or a housing development. And again, this is something that was admitted publicly in the New York Times by some of these activists. That's why I say I think it's a scandal of the first order. Could I get your commitment in light of these admissions to go back and re-examine Endangered Species Act listings and identify any other potential false designations?
Senator Cotton, you raise a very important issue, which is the weaponization of federal rules, meant to actually protect wildlife, but to do it in a way where it's being used not to protect wildlife, but it's being used to stop legal activities like the multiple use scenario we were just talking about with Senator Barrasso. It's just a legal weapon, and it's used for fundraising. It's used for groups that are just trying to block our nation's progress. And so I agree with you completely. And you mentioned the New York Times. If that article was someplace else, but the fact that the New York Times wrote that article, I found to also be remarkable admission of at least one case where there was the abuse of the Endangered Species Act relative to its intended use. So yes, you can count. Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because also I think not in light just of this public admission, but also the West Virginia case and the Loper-Bright case, there could be legal infirmity in a lot of our federal bureaucracy's past decisions. So I appreciate your willingness to take a look at that once you're on the job. Thank you very much.
That concludes round one. We're going to do a quick round two with some follow-ups that a few members have asked. I want to talk to you briefly about the fact that public lands represent a massive public asset, and yet a lack of an accurate valuation is something that we don't have, and that undermines informed decision-making about their use and their management. What steps would you take, if confirmed as Secretary, to improve the transparency in this area and ensure federal land valuations reflect their value to the American people?
Well, I would just say on this idea that what I'll call America's balance sheet is something that the Trump administration has quite a bit of enthusiasm in discussions with Treasury nominee Scott Bessent. Commerce nominee Howard Lutnick, and even Speaker Mike Johnson called me a few weeks ago and said, hey, what's this American balance sheet idea? I mean, I think for our standing in the world, for us to, talk nonstop about what our liabilities are, we should also be fluent, just as any business would be, to be able to talk about what our assets. And the assets of this country, I think, outpace any place in the world because of the care that we've given, in particular to the public lands, the surface, the subsurface, and the offshore. And we've proven time and time again that we can do it better, cleaner, and safer than anyone else here. If I'm a timber company and I own timber land and it's not been harvested, I put that on my balance sheet. If I've got timberland and I've planted young trees, I put it on my balance sheet at a different valuation. When we protect U.S. lands and then don't cut a tree and then they burn down, we not only produce enormous amounts of emissions and enormous amounts of carbon, but we also have effectively wasted the public's asset. And I think it's part of our duty in the role, if I have the privilege of being nominated here, but all of us as elected officials, to make sure that we're getting a return on the nation's balance sheet for the benefit and the use of the American people. Great. So understanding that number, I think, is key. I would just say one last thing. People say, oh, it's going to be really hard. It's really hard to develop it. We did this in North Dakota. When I took office, they said, well, we have no way of knowing what our undeveloped minerals are. And we found a young software company that was able to figure out precisely what the future value of every one of the wells in North Dakota on public land would be worth. It's been used for estate planning. If grandma dies and she's only got 10% of one well, they can figure out the value for that. If we can do that there, we can figure it out for the whole country. And just as I said to Speaker Johnson, we're required as a nation to conduct a census within every 10 years, not every 10 years, but within 10 years, do a census. That's hard work, but we figure out a way to do it. I would think if Congress stood up and said, hey, every agency, every bureau, every department of the United States government needs to figure out what their asset value is, then we get after it, and we get after it, and we come up with a number, and then we can make these trade-offs. When you do by executive order and take hundreds of millions of offshore subsurface out of leasing, and that's viewed as a costless event, at least we could have the trade-off of say, yes, some people thought it was important to take that off of the table, but what did it mean for the American people? Did we just take trillions of dollars of future revenue out of the pockets of our future generations? And so I think, again, creating a finance that is where we can have an honest discussion about some of these executive actions that are happening at the end of this term, for example, would be useful for all Americans to understand.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've got another question that I was going to ask regarding PILT. In the interest of time, I'm going to forego that. I'll just conclude it with a very brief statement. PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, the federal government came up with it, Congress came up with it about 50 years ago to help offset the burden states carry, states with a lot of public land, because they don't receive any property tax revenue from it, so it's supposed to offset that. In some parts of the country where there's a lot of public land, this works out okay. In other parts, it's pennies on the dollar compared to what they would get if they could tax the land even at its lowest valuation and lowest rate. So I would love to talk to you about PILT reforms and making PILT generally a priority, because a lot of these communities rely on it for fire, search and rescue, schools, safety, so forth. Senator Heinrich.
Governor, Senator Daines mentioned a very specific challenge with the Endangered Species Act, but as a governor, you know that one of the best ways to head off those conflicts is to prevent species from ever being listed by recovering them through proactive voluntary conservation at the state level. Senator Tillis and 9 of his Republican colleagues and I have a highly bipartisan bill called the Recovering America's Wildlife Act that helps states do exactly that. And in fact, North Dakota's former Game and Fish Director, Terry Steinwand, was one of the architects of that legislation. It's got strong support from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, from many of the conservation groups that you mentioned in your exchange with Senator Justice. Does that sound like the kind of approach Tillis and I on?
Absolutely, Senator Heinrich. I think that, again, super sound principle there, which is to do the work to keep it off of the any kind of federal designation, working collaboratively with the states. I had the pleasure of working with our Game and Fish Commissioner, Terry Steinwand, for 6 of my 8 years as governor. He had almost a 40-year career in wildlife management. It's people like that I know and respect across all the states. I know you've got them in New Mexico. I know we've got them in Utah. I mean, the people that work in game and fish at the state level that are working on these things. I haven't met somebody from the federal level that flies into North Dakota that cares more about the soil, the air, the water, the fish, the wildlife than the people that we have at the state level. And we should just, this sounds like you're entrusting this back to the states, and that's where it belongs.
And it was really an idea that grew out of asking all of those agencies, like, what's the right way to approach this? And they said, well, instead of, just having an emergency room, which is what the Endangered Species Act effectively is, let's try to give wildlife primary care. Let's intervene when it's much cheaper and much more effective, and you can really move the needle. Those are incredibly important for water certainty in the West, especially with all the, conflicts we have, not just in the Colorado Basin, but also in the Rio Grande Basin and other western basins. If you're confirmed, will you commit to continuing the department's work to both resolve legal claims around tribal water settlements, but also just implement the existing water settlements that have already been made?
Well, you've got my commitment to work on those important issues.
Great. I'm going to make one other quick statement. I know you heard from my friend and colleague from Idaho, and we've done some great work together on cleaning up abandoned mines. We don't necessarily agree on wind generation, but I would simply remind you that onshore wind is in that basket of multiple use, and so you can always hold it to the same standard as oil and gas, but you can't legally, at least, unilaterally deny legally permitted wind generation. So with that, thank you for all of your answers today.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to associate myself with your comments, Mr. Chairman, on determining the asset value of what we own. It's astounding that that doesn't exist. And one of the things that would contribute to, as we discussed previously, is adequate maintenance budgets. If you know the asset value, there are sort of standard industry percentages that should be applied in order to determine a maintenance budget. So I believe that's an important step. I presume you believe climate change is a problem. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that climate change is a global phenomenon for sure.
I noted the biographical material that in 2021 as governor, you set a goal for North Dakota of carbon neutrality by 2030 to be achieved in a variety of ways. And as you mentioned, you've really worked hard on the carbon neutrality of fossil fuel extraction and fossil fuel use. I'm a little worried today, though. You keep distinguishing between intermittent and baseload. Would you agree that renewable resources, solar and wind, for example, can be developed if they are adequately, if they can be integrated into the grid in a safe and reliable way?
Yes, they can, and it's not for me personally for any political reasons that I distinguish. It's just because of physics, the physics of the grid. If we don't have enough base load, and it's the base load that we have that's allowed our nation to make the investments into the intermittent.
I don't want the word. In a former life, I developed both base load and intermittent resources. I don't want the word base load to be code for no renewables. That's not what you're saying, is it?
No, we need a balance, but they cannot. The intermittent, if you want to call them renewables, is used as a positive word, but this is a fact of life, is they're intermittent. And when they're intermittent, until we have storage solutions, and we're years away from having significant enough cost-effective storage to support that, we need to have the base load, or the intermittent doesn't even have a life.
But it can be integrated. In your case in North Dakota, 35% of your electricity comes from wind power. I presume your grid works.
Well, it's super stressed as it is around the country. We're in parts of two grids. We're part of MISO going east, and we're part of SPP going west. And you can have days when the rated capacity is 30, but you got a day when the wind's blowing. The wind's blowing so hard it drives all the base load off of production. And then the next day it's 20 below and there's no wind blowing, and we got no wind, and then you got to like crank up the base load again. And so
that's one of the most important reasons that we've talked about innovation. We need to work on storage. You would agree, I think, that renewables or intermittents, whatever you want to call them, plus storage equals baseload.
Yes, but right now at a much higher cost. And so then, of course, we want to not only have it be reliable, we also want to have it be affordable. And so that's part of what we have to look at as a nation is what cost are we willing to take on to try to achieve those goals. And I believe in if it's all of the above, if we can decarbonize traditional fuels cheaper than we can subsidize some of the renewables, then that should be looked at fairly and equitably and economically, because that's a better path forward for every citizen if we can do it more affordably.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but we've talked a lot about innovation, and I'm a great believer in American innovation. And the cost, for example, of solar panels has gone from, I don't know, $70 a kilowatt down to 70 cents. I mean, battery storage, for example, in Maine, there is a project underway for an 85 megawatt, 100-hour grid scale storage at a reasonable cost, because it's not based on lithium ion, or it's based on iron. And so if we're moving into a period where innovation, I believe, will bring storage down. And of course, as you know, wind and solar are the cheapest forms of energy today on a levelized basis, understanding that storage and backup is part of that calculation. But I hope that you'll work with the Department of Energy. Mr. Wright was here yesterday, and one of his business interests was in geothermal and batteries. So I just, when I hear base load used sometimes in these contexts, it sounds like no more renewables. I don't think that's a sustainable path for this country, and it's certainly not a way of meeting the challenge of climate change, which you've acknowledged is a serious one.
No, we need all forms of electricity, and we need more of it in the very near term. And so this is not about one versus the other. This is about how do we drive forward and increase the amount of electricity we have in the country. So I'm a both, all of the above in terms of our approach on how we do it, but we got to do it in a way that's we have affordability and reliability. On the storage side, there is a future, but having been in tech for 30 years, batteries get better at about 2% a year, and that's what it's been for 30 or 40 years. And there's no breakthrough that's coming. Yes, it's improving, but it's not like the microchip, which doubles in power.
It may not be Moore's law, but I think the amount of resources that are going into this research at the Department of Energy and in other places, and the development of this iron-based grid scale storage, there are opportunities for significant baseloads. I like your answer where you said we need it all. I appreciate having that on the record.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Governor. Appreciate you having
Thank you, Senator.
being with us.
Senator Hickenlooper.
I ran down the hall to get here. I didn't want to miss my chance for a second round of questions. And again, thank you for your service as a governor all the way through your career. You've shown a real inclination both through your government service, but through your philanthropy to engage in the community and to go to the community. I think the letters from the tribes and what I've heard from our tribes in Colorado, that you are held in very, very high esteem, I think, across this country. And I think that's going to be a powerful thing. I have one curious question. I think they're still doing it with the Western Governors Association. Do they still meet with the Secretary of the Interior in December, or did they stop doing that?
There's a BINID, which is usually in late January, early February, and I would look forward to having the opportunity for that invitation. If you know anybody there that could send me one.
Well, I knew that other governors are watching our discussion, so I want to make sure I got that out there.
I think your own Governor Polis may be the current chair. So
This governor thing's getting kind of thick, isn't it?
Well, it's distilled down pretty much just us left. I want to talk a little bit about the Colorado River. And it's at least it's a 25-year drought, but a longer-term drought. And we're able to go back. This is the geologist in me, but there's sediments throughout the Grand Canyon that can be correlated. And this appears to be the worst drought in 10,000 years. I mean, this is a serious drought. And you've got 40 million people that depend on this. And we've been working aggressively with the lower basin states and the upper basin states. And one of the things I was, even before you began running for the highest office, the work that you did around water in North Dakota, where roughly it was the largest investments in water infrastructure ever, but half of it was what the Department of Interior would have. And I think you have to kind of look at the Colorado River in that sense too. I think that the Bureau of Reclamation plays a significant role there, but I think a strong leader being able to find and incentivize those innovations of how do we make sure we're saving water and doing more with the water that we have rather than fighting over it. And there's a long tradition in the West of whiskeys for drinking, waters for fighting, as we said last week. Anyway, to speak a little bit about that, of how you look at of kind of working with the Colorado River, but there are a whole number of river basins that are in drought right now.
Yes, and we've got a tremendous water resource in this country. When we think about the Great Lakes, you think about the Columbia, you think about the Yukon, the Mississippi sometimes is flooding when the Colorado's in drought. We just maybe don't have it all in the right places at the right time, and where we've got population centers. And so I think, again, with smart planning, innovation, collaboration, when we've been successful in North Dakota with private-public partnerships, it's included, solutions, again, with great help from Senator Hoeven, playing a huge role on the federal. I mean, one of the projects we have there is a couple $2 billion. It's a third federal, it's a third local with a local sales tax, huge buy-in locally, and then the state stepping up and participating. So, when we did that together, this project's going to get done in 6.5 or 7 years, as opposed to 20 or 25 or never. With something, because we have that experience in North Dakota too. We got water projects at the federal level that were started in the 1960s that still haven't fulfilled their full mission.
Right.
So anyway, I think there's an opportunity to work together to come up with solutions.
And that timeliness does magnify what can get done. The Bureau of Reclamation has done a lot of work in Colorado, I think across the West, and I think I'm universal that I haven't heard a single senator, Republican or Democrat, complain about how they've approached this. They have a bunch of projects that are midway, and I'm hopeful that I know there's going to be there's a lot of talk about a tax cut and a lot of talk about how they're going to pay for that tax cut. Hopefully we can protect those funds that have been committed to various water projects, because the worst thing you can have, and this has happened to Colorado 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, agree. Having a secure and predictable forms of capital for these projects. When you have the instability, the uncertainty, then the people that are bidding on the projects bid higher. They have to take out more risk on their side. Their insurance companies that are supporting them on the private side say, don't do this. When we were able to go to the private-public partnership and we could create certainty that they would have the permits, that lowered the cost dramatically, and not only the time to get it done, but it also lowered the cost.
It's music to my ears, and we agree completely. So we'll remember this conversation 3 years from now, and I'm sure who knows what the future will bring. But I appreciate that commitment to the long-term solutions. I think that is necessary on almost every level in this country.
Great, thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One quick item for the record. As you know, I've passed legislation to keep horses in the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. I'm a horse fan. You and your wife are horse fans. I just want to know that you'll commit to the record to continue to work on that very important issue with me.
Absolutely. National Park have even more followers on social media than he does.
Yeah, no question. And then just one final item. I think you've demonstrated to both sides of the aisle your absolute willingness to work with everybody to achieve good outcomes and a good outcome for this country. And that's exactly what we want in somebody that goes into these important positions. And so thank you to Catherine. And then just if there's anything for the record that you want to add to the record, I would just give you this opportunity before turning things back to the chairman. And again, I want to thank both the chairman and the ranking member as well.
Well, the only thing I would do quickly is close with gratitude to Chairman Lee and Ranking Member Heinrich. Thank you for your time ahead of time. Thank you for making your members available to me for meetings ahead of time. And thanks for this great dialogue and discussion today. I've received a lot of invitations from members to come and visit. I would be remiss if I didn't, before I leave, to extend an invitation on behalf of Senator Hoeven, Senator Kramer, and myself to come to the grand opening of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum, which is an opportunity to tell the story of conservation that really began during the time when Theodore Roosevelt spent time in North Dakota. His wife and his mother tragically died on the same day in the same house, on Valentine's Day of 1884, and he had a newborn infant daughter that was 2 days old. He handed that off to his sister, and he got on the train, and he was deeply despondent and went west and remade himself from the he'd had a childhood of that was full of sickness, and he went from a sickly Easterner and became a rough and tumble Westerner cowboy, learned the hard way out there with a lot of time in the saddle, and built the Elkhorn Ranch. And from then he developed his thoughts about conservation in this country. And we know the story that went from there. That led him to become the Rough Rider that he was, that propelled him into becoming a governor. Formed the National Governors Association, saved football. I mean, now the largest viewed sport. And the NCAA was formed because Theodore Roosevelt was listening to concerns from mothers whose too many of their sons were dying of head injuries. And so he said, let's come up with some standard safety protection. So there's many stories about TR that haven't been told like that, but the only president to receive a Medal of Honor for his time in the military. One of his sons also received a Medal of Honor, who was there at Normandy in World War II. But incredible story, and of course Nobel Peace Prize that he received for negotiating the settlement between Russia and Japan. And he wrote more books than all the other presidents combined. He wrote more letters than Jefferson and Washington. We're in the process of digitizing all of that. This will be the first digital presidential library. It'll be one of the most sustainable buildings built in North America. And it's in the heart of the Badlands that he loved, at a gateway community that goes into the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And tradition, when you open a presidential library, all living presidents are invited. So we may, if they all show up, we may not need to have additional fireworks. But it'll be a great, because there's a lot of what we know about Theodore Roosevelt that still lives on today. And think about the discussions we're having. The Panama Canal wouldn't have happened without him, and how important that was for our country during World War II, and how important it is for our future going forward. So water systems in Arizona were dedicated and created by Theodore Roosevelt. One of the first wildlife refuges that he made in the country was in North Stump Lake. He sent us on a way to build out the national park system as we know it right now. So it's with a bit of serendipity and a great amount of excitement that as Secretary of Interior, I'll look forward to being at that opening along with all of you. This committee's all officially invited as of right now. It would be great to have you all there. And with that, again, thank you, senators, and especially thank you, Senator Hoeven and Kramer, for your folks' your support, your friendship, and your mentorship for all these years.
Thank you, Governor. It's been a great hearing, and I appreciate the participation of all the members of the staff, members of the committee, and especially our Capitol Police Force keeping us safe today. I'm sure that given all the time he spent in North Dakota, Theodore Roosevelt learned correctly to pronounce the name of the animal that is called the bison.
It is. It does have a Z. I agree with.
It's got a Z.
B-I-Z.
It's a Z that, well, it's not a silent Z. It's just an invisible one. With all that,
Mr. Chairman, do you know what the Lady Buffalo said to her little boy as he was going off to school?
Oh no, I don't. What did he say?
Bye, son.
That's it.
I would also mention that Teddy Roosevelt coined.
I love it. I just love
Going
it.
to open up a whole new debate.
He coined the term malefactors of great wealth. I'll just leave it at that.
Hovind's going to be telling that one for weeks. The record will stand open until 6 p.m. today for questions for the record. We stand adjourned.
Thank you all for coming. Rob Bonta, California Attorney General. At the outset, let me